Patrick McKeown joins us at the CITIC CLSA Investors Forum in Hong Kong and sat with Russell Chin to explain how we are breathing wrong and how we can benefit from using unexpected techniques he's developed through his research.
Hi, I'm Russell Chin from Asia Equity Sales in London. I'd like to welcome Patrick McKeown from Oxygen Advantage, the author of this book. Welcome to Hong Kong. Welcome to the CITIC CLSA Forum. Please tell us about the Oxygen Advantage.
Russell, thanks very much. The premise of the Oxygen Advantage was to bring breathing as a mental and physical performance to men. And it went back to my history that I was working a lot with respiration and since 2002. And I remember working with a lot of people for anxiety and panic disorder from 2010 to 2012, 13, because of the economic crash. 95% of people who turned up were women. Men weren't turning up. So then I devised, okay, I need to be able to bring a way that's amenable to the normal everyday man and to show him the benefits of getting out of their head into the body, developing the capacity to be able to concentrate, to hold attention, but also then, if things go wrong, how can you then step back from that and get back into what you're doing? So that was the idea. And I felt that one route into doing that was through sports performance. So I use sports as a means of getting people out of their head. But I use breathing, but breathing in sports, if that makes sense.
That's very interesting. I hadn't really thought about breathing for whatever reason in terms of doing sports and reaching out to men. Just kind of the parts I've read about the book so far, it does seem a bit counterintuitive of the findings that that you've come to. Can you kind of explain this a bit?
Sure, because most people, they feel that the more air you breathe, the more oxygen that's delivered throughout the body. But yet we all know that in times of stress, when we breathe faster and harder, we are breathing more air, but we often feel, we can feel lightheaded, we feel that we're not really there. And it's not a great time as well to make decisions or to plan a course of action because we're activating the fight or flight response. So it isn't counterintuitive that if you want to improve your blood circulation and if you want to increase oxygen delivery throughout the body, including the brain, and we estimate that you can improve oxygen delivery to the brain, at least blood flow, and with that oxygen delivery, by between 9 and 12%. And it's not by taking the full big breaths that people talk about, it's actually by doing the opposite. So it's just about taking a very, very soft, gentle breath in through the nose and a really, really relaxed, slow, gentle breath out to the point that you are under breathing. And this allows a gas called carbon dioxide to accumulate in the lungs and blood, just small accumulation. But of course, carbon dioxide, it's not just a waste gas. It dilates blood vessels and it also causes red blood cells to release oxygen more readily. So yes, if our goal is to improve oxygenation, it's not about taking the full big breaths that we often hear.
Some of the analogies that you put into the book were very interesting to me about it's like taking a full glass of water, for example, and trying to pour more water into it, likening that to taking too big a breath of air, and how that's not really very productive. So, because every time I think, oh, if I'm nervous about something, or I'm about to do something big, or I'm going to get into a big sports match, etc., all right, take a big breath of air and just go into it. So it's interesting that that is actually not the way to do it.
Well, it's like this, coming back to the glass of water. If the glass is already pretty full, well, you can keep pouring in. You're not going to add too much more to it. Our blood is always, for a healthy person, 95 to 99% saturated with oxygen. Normally it's about 98, 99%. So even if you started taking these full gulps of air, well, you're only going to increase your oxygen, maybe by 1 to 2%. But the thing is, it's not about the air that you bring in here that's really counting. So it's not about what we bring into the nose or mouth that we should be thinking about. We should be thinking about our alveolar ventilation. In other words, the air, the volume of air that's getting down to the small air sacs. The small air sacs in the lungs. We should be thinking about the transfer of oxygen from the lungs to the blood, and we should be thinking about the transfer of oxygen from the blood to the tissues and organs. And that's where I really want to focus on. So most people are focusing on here. We should be thinking about downstream because that's where it's really at.
So it's interesting to hear the origin story, kind of getting through to people who have not been thinking about breathing as much, or a lot of men not thinking about it, etc., going towards athletes trying to improve their performance. But maybe we can talk a bit about, I don't know, maybe the average kind of person who might be trying to get a bit fitter, might be trying to improve, something about childcare or their performance at work or anything else in kind of everyday life. Could you talk about how you've helped some of those people?
I think one of the biggest things that we have got in terms of, and even my own personal application for me, is the ability to be able to direct my attention. And, how often have we considered how well do I concentrate? How well can I hold my attention on one thing? How well can I self-regulate? And these are probably the most important traits for any walk of life, whether it's sports or whether it's corporate or whether it's family life. We've spent 12, 15 years in formal education, but yet, while we have been trained how to think, we have not been trained how to direct our application, our energy to one thing. We haven't been trained how to think effectively. We haven't been trained how to stop thinking either. And very often we live in our heads. And a lot of people spend a lot of time ruminating and spending a lot of time in unproductive thinking that literally gets us nowhere, that all it's doing is just going in a merry-go-round, and don't necessarily have the capacity to be able to hold their attention upon what they want to hold it upon. So for me, it goes beyond mindfulness, because it's not just about holding your attention on the breath. It's actually about changing your breathing patterns as well to help bring balance to the autonomic nervous system. Because if, for example, we have really poor sleep quality, which is pretty common, 30 to 40% of people have insomnia. Insomnia is very much caused by overstimulation of the mind. 30 to 40% of people snore heavy. 25 to 50% of men have obstructive sleep apnea. So here we have poor sleep. And then we look at the incidence of poor breathing in the population. And that can range from between 10% to 75%, depending on the person. Now, if I say to somebody, I want you to direct your attention somewhere, I want you to access flow states, if that person has poor sleep and poor breathing, they are not going to access flow. And flow is this state of mind whereby your attention is fully immersed in what you're doing, that all of your energy is applied to what you are doing. And the right action happens by itself. It's almost that it's effortless. And you'll even produce a quality of work that surpasses what you probably would have thought. So how can we access that? And I can access it. I can reproduce it at will. If I can do it, anybody can do it. But we have to look at what are the building blocks to do that. And it's pretty simple. And I think we all know, because we know that when we wake up with a dry mouth in the morning and we're feeling lousy, mentally we are not there. We're just going through the motions. We're not applying ourselves to the fullest of our potential. If our physiology, because of overstimulation and high stress and high demands, has launched into this fight or flight response, whereby our breathing is just a little bit faster and harder, well, the brain interprets that the body is under threat, and all the brain wants to do is get us out of the situation. So this is where sleep and physiology are very important. And to come back to your question, Russell, what's the biggest thing that we can get out of this? It's the capacity to hold our attention fully immersed in what we are doing, regardless of what we are doing.
So you mentioned at the beginning a little bit about how people can do this.
Yes.
In terms of kind of shorter, kind of smaller intake of oxygen.
Yes.
So for example, our investors, clients, a lot of big decisions over the day. What kind of things would you recommend to them? There's a big decision to be made, a big investment decision to be made, in terms of saying, okay, how do we calm the mind? How do we get the focus? How do we really sustain that?
If we want to have attention and a capacity to make good decisions when we need it, we have to be thinking about how the mind is operating outside of workplace too. And if we are spending most of our time scrolling through social media, overstimulation with overinformation, we're literally training the brain that it cannot stop thinking. Now, if one then is presented with a difficult decision to make, in order to be able to make a decision with quality attention and quality of thought, we need to have the capacity to be able to direct our attention to that one thing. However, if we're spending most of our day in a state of distraction, how can we really then have our attention when we need it most? We have to think about what are we doing in our everyday life. And for me, I've no social media apps on my phone. I really am relentless about the time that I give to information technology. And I do want to give myself some attention. I bring my attention onto my breath, into my body, into present moment awareness. I do it in my everyday life when I can do it. If I go for a walk, if I'm in a car, if I'm just sitting down the evening time. In other words, we all have times that we have a few minutes to spare. Most people nowadays, when they have a few minutes to spare, they take their phone out of their pocket. But that's not downtime, that's overstimulation. And we are not equipped to be able to cope with the amount of information that's coming at us now. So if our objective is to be able to have our full capacity to make decisions and to allow intuition to come in, and intuition arises, this gut instinct that when, anytime we're making a decision, we don't have all the data. We can do due diligence, but we also have to rely on our gut. And the most effective entrepreneurs, they have managed this. And if you look at the likes of Richard Branson, the late Steve Jobs, any people who have reached that caliber whereby they have fresh and original insights, they have been able to tap into intuition. Well, if the mind is flooded with thinking, intuition is going to be sabotaged, our attention is sabotaged. So good decision-making ability is also based on optimal sleep quality and also giving ourselves some attention and managing our attention. Where are we placing our attention? Are we practicing distraction all day long and yet we expect to have attention when we need it most? It's not going to happen.
So just to come full circle about athletic performance, it would be remiss of me not to ask in terms of what are the best practices in terms of trying to optimize athletic performance, whatever that might be. What would you advise?
In a very simple basis, I would say people switch from mouth to nose breathing. And I know that sounds so simple, but our nose performs a minimum of 30 functions in the human body. And if we do physical exercise with our mouth closed, initially the air hunger is a little bit stronger. The sensation of breathlessness is a little bit higher. But the more we do our physical exercise with the mouth closed, we are training our body to be able to do physical exercise with less ventilation. We are becoming more efficient. And as I said at the start, it's not about the oxygen that comes into your nose or mouth that's the key. We have to be thinking about downstream. And if you switch from mouth to nose breathing during physical exercise, and yes, there is a transitional period, because when you switch to nose breathing, your nose is smaller than your mouth, your nose imposes a resistance to your breathing, but even thinking about it this way, your nose adds an extra load onto the diaphragm, you're strengthening the diaphragm breathing muscle, that in turn reduces breathlessness. Your diaphragm breathing muscle isn't just for respiration, but it's also providing stabilization for the spine, so there's a relationship between breathing and movement, there's a relationship between the diaphragm and the emotions. Also, when you breathe through your nose during physical exercise, you've got improved blood flow, it lowers your heart rate, you've got reduced lactic acid post-physical exercise, you've got increased oxygen delivery throughout the body, and you're not wasting energy unnecessary. So if we want to train ourselves to be, and I'm not an athlete, I work with athletes and I work with some world-class athletes, and if we want to train ourselves to be very efficient with what we do, we need to train that very thing, and respiration is one thing. So we do physical exercise with less ventilation, and then your body adapts to that and you get other benefits as well.
Well, it would seem that the proof really is in the pudding, going from high altitude training to other people who have adopted this kind of method. Are there any kind of highlights that you would say for people who have not done it before and started doing it, what kind of results they got?
Yes, I'll give you an example, because very often, Russell, people say to me, it's impossible to do physical exercise with my mouth closed. And of course I get it. When you switch from mouth to nose breathing, there is a resistance to your breathing. One example is a guy called IF24, and he completed what's called Barclay Marathons. It's one of the most gruesome marathons on earth. It was developed after a prison break in the United States, and individuals are running probably, I think it's about 60 miles or so. And only 26 people have completed this marathon since 1986. So if you think of all of the people who have entered a marathon, and there have been only 26 finishers. The guy who finished it this year, well, it's actually 2023, but he came in first, the first finisher. There were 5 finishers, I think, that year. His name is IF24, and his secret ingredient is the oxygen advantage. Now, there's one example, but we've also had some athletes who won medals at the past Olympics. Adam Burgess, for example, and he is an oxygen advantage instructor, and he won a silver medalist, but we've other athletes as well.
That's an amazing note to end on. Thank you, Patrick, so much. Thank you, viewers, for your time with CITIC CLSA.